our code. Let me know if it doesn't work. If you don't put all the capital letters in correctly, the link does not work. If you don't know, I think categories, if you don't know what you are, check any and all that might apply. Kind of keep going as you guys are finishing up. Okay, how do we do what we do? Most important thing is our community member, the people that show up, people that are here to learn, the people who are in startups, that are in education, that are in related communities. We need sponsors always. We're always looking for people. Later on in the year, after February and March, we're kind of looking for ideas. If you have a really exciting new product, talk to us. We're really excited about both getting the message out and continuing to go on with our meetup. We have options if you want to sponsor an event. We often have showcases. And then coming up in February, we have a slow pitch. So we're looking for a few different people. We're looking for companies that want to become EdTech companies and grow in the community. And we're also looking for startup advisors to advise these companies. And we're looking for people who are practitioners, so researchers and teachers that can also give feedback to these people. And we're trying to bring all three of these elements together to help these startups succeed. So if you are interested in getting involved, email us. So coming up, February 5th is that slow pitch competition. I believe it's from 3 to 5 p.m. here. It might be up here, it might be downstairs, not quite sure. We'll be having a regular meetup with a goal-setting workshop. And then on February 24th, we're partnering with the Student Startup Crawl, and it's a really neat week. We're looking for companies that are willing to host kids to come in on a Student Startup Crawl. If you're a teacher and you want to introduce your students to the startup world and the tech world, contact us, because it's a free event. All you have to do is get your kids down here, and we'll host you at various different startups, and they can learn about the world of tech and see how fun and exciting it is and see all the good snacks and want to get more involved. March, we're going to be involved in the South by Southwest conference, and we're going to be doing an offsite meeting. And then April, we have an innovation showcase. So if you're a company and you want to present, let us know. Again, for the 5th time, there's our email address. We're looking for volunteers. So if you have any experience in social media, web design, fundraising, event planning, we would love to get you involved, even if you don't think, I know about technology, I know about education. Anybody who's passionate about getting EdTech Austin running and going, we would love to hear from you. Again, our email. Again, our agenda. Up next, we're going to have Ryan Torby present about CS for Texas. I'm really excited about this, so welcome. Oh, I'll put that on at the end.
Cool. All right.
Thank you.
Let's get this one. Like that. All right. We are doing the changing of the slide deck. All right, great. Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm going to introduce myself just a little bit. My name is Ryan Torby, but first I want to say welcome. I've been actually coming to the EdTech meetup since maybe like month 5 of the EdTech meetup. I've been ever since I moved to Austin. It was one of the things I sought out. I was a K-6 teacher in New Mexico. I was a technology teacher. And when I moved to Austin, I kind of wanted to connect with other people in Austin who shared a love of education technology. And I Google searched education technology Austin, and this is what popped up. And here years later, I'm here still, which is kind of fun. So who am I? One thing I'm doing, I'm going to go, I guess, left to right and top to bottom here. So I'm here tonight to talk to you as part of CS for Texas. CS for Texas is an advocacy kind of network that is our main focus is expanding computer science education in grades K through 12 across Texas. We hold some webinars and some meetups and are just trying to rally people around the cause of expanding computer science education in our schools. We teach CS and EdTech right here, are two organizations that are we teach CS is now under EdTech, but they're both out of University of Texas. I am actually a PhD student now at the University of Texas. I spent a few years here teaching in Austin and then decided to do something silly and go get my PhD. So I'm 3 years in to my hopefully 4 years and done an out PhD. It's in STEM education. And I'm working with We Teach CS and EdTech right now. EdTech is expanding pathways in computing, and We Teach CS is kind of a teacher support network for computer science teachers. Both are housed under TAC, which is the Texas Advanced Computing Center. It's the supercomputer lab on campus, or it's not on campus, it's actually at the Pickle Research Center. What's really neat is I sit very, very close to some of the fastest supercomputers in the entire world. So that's kind of cool. I was part of Teach for America, and I don't always have that up there under Who Am I, but I wanted to kind of shout out to Teach for America tonight. In 2011, I packed up my car. I was a marketing coordinator before that, and I decided to change my life, and I had gotten into Teach for America, and I drove out to the Navajo Reservation in New Mexico. It was very, very, very rural. My girlfriend out there, she lived 40 minutes away from a grocery store, and just, you know, it was completely different, and it completely changed my life and got me to have a passion for education, a passion for rural education, a passion for technology education, and I think it's a huge reason why I'm here today. And then CSTA Central Texas. CSTA is the Computer Science Teachers Association. I'm the president of CSTA Central Texas, but they have chapters all over the country. Computer Science Teachers Association is great for anyone who is or considers themselves maybe a computer science teacher or computer science teacher adjacent. So maybe they're the history teacher who does an after-school coding club, or they're just interested in it, or they're a curriculum provider. CSTA is a really great resource, and it's free to join. So I would encourage everyone to just maybe Google search that after I stop talking. But from one thing that I want to know, because I'm going to tailor this a little bit to who's in the room, is who are you? So really quick, we're going to do like kind of the teacher thing where I'll shout out maybe a role-ish, and then you can raise your hands. So first, who in this room are teachers? Cool. Neat. Awesome. Who in this room are from at the college level educators? So professors, assistant professors, administrators. All right. Who is a graduate student? Cool. Who is an undergraduate student? Anybody? Who is an EdTech entrepreneur? Okay. So we have about a lot of graduate students, some entrepreneurs. Anybody else who I didn't call out what? Who didn't raise their hand? Raise your hand if you didn't raise your hand. Come on. Okay, what are you? Okay.
Texas, so I'm here to see how the EdTech industry can see what can we do to help.
Excellent, great. Anyone else who raised their hand and want to?
Technically fall under EdTech, I think. I run a business where I teach music production.
Okay, great, excellent. Yep. Shout it out. So we have some corporate people here. That's really important because part of what I love about EdTech Austin was you cast kind of this big tent approach to EdTech, and we're bringing a lot of different people into the room. So I'll keep that in mind as I talk about what I'm going to talk about. So what I am going to talk about is I didn't edit the slide, but that's okay. What I am going to talk about is I'm going to be diving into, I scrapped for the bills that I was going to talk about. We're going to dive into about 10 bills from last legislative session related to tech education. But before we dive into those bills, I'm going to give just a kind of very brief overview of how the legislative process works in Texas. And then we're going to do maybe a little question and answer, but I don't want to take away from networking time. I think a huge aspect of this is you all talking to each other, and you can always talk to me afterwards. So this is the Texas Capitol. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend taking a tour. It's a beautiful building, and every 2 years it is filled with legislators. We just had the 86th legislative session. It started in January of last year and then ended in May of last year. It's 140 days, and what happens is that it happens every 2 years. So they don't have it every year, they have it every 2 years. Oh, just the organizer, blowing up her phone. I'm so glad I'm the guest speaker right now. So who pushes for tech legislation during these sessions? Sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's some advocacy groups like CS for Texas. A lot of times it's corporations, maybe hiring lobbyists. So TechNet is a lobbying firm, and they represent big tech. There's also, in terms of like advocacy groups, there's the Texas Computer Education Association, which is a kind of teacher membership and IT or school-based membership organization, and they have an advocacy person too. These people are trying to kind of push tech education because honestly, tech education isn't at the forefront of the minds of the state senators or the state representatives. It just isn't. You would think that maybe it would be. They come to Austin every 2 years. They represent a lot of technology, industry from their locations, but education isn't at the forefront. A lot of people, if you ask them if we're doing tech education in schools, would probably say, yeah, we're doing it. But they don't realize that we're not doing it. Less than half of schools are actually teaching computer science education, when all of them are actually supposed to be. For the just a really quick primer about some of the things we're going to go over tonight. HB stands for House Bill, and SB stands for Senate Bill. That means just where the bill was introduced. So when a bill is introduced, let's say it's an HB bill, it starts in the House, it goes through a committee in the House, normally the Education Committee, sometimes different depending on what the bill is, and then it gets approved and then gets passed over to the Senate. And they end up rectifying it and coming together and actually passing the bill, and it goes off to the governor to sign. HB and SB just determine where the bill starts. It doesn't mean necessarily, I think, anything other than that. We have some other alphabet soup stuff here too. State Board of Education is SBOE, and then you have State Board of Educator Certification, and then TEA is the Texas Education Agency. TEA is the governing body. It's the actual government entity that Texas has that does the work of that statewide education, whereas the State Board of Education is it's literally a board that deals with some of the educational rules and changes. And then educator certification is kind of self-explanatory. They're saying, hey, you know what? We have a new course. It's Algebra 7. Who's going to be able to teach Algebra 7? What are the standards that we're going to have for teachers to actually be certified to teach Algebra 7? There is no Algebra 7, but that's a good example. So one thing before we dive into the 10 bills is I want to talk about the last legislative session. So the one before this previous one. In computer science land, which is where I spend most of my time, we had a really big win. We had a bill that said, hey, TEA, you need to do a cybersecurity pathway. That's a huge deal for a state like Texas. And we're now one of the at the forefront of cybersecurity education because we have a pathway. The implementation took a little while. It doesn't happen instantaneously. TEA can pull some levers on their own. If TEA wanted to create something, they can. Sometimes they don't want to create something, even though nice advocates go up to them and say, hey, you should have this. Sometimes it takes the legislature to actually pull those levers for them. So this bill that was passed said, TEA, you must create a cybersecurity pathway. Now, they basically say you should do this, and then there's this lag time, and they're waiting till the next legislative session comes up when everyone's going to meet again, and they're figuring, oh, well, they're going to go talk about it. We should get this done. We actually did get it done, and basically TEA convened a panel of people. I was actually one of them, and lucky to be on it. Where we wrote the standards for 2 new courses, Foundations of Cybersecurity and the Cybersecurity Capstone course. And those courses were rolled out this year and are going to be continued to be rolled out across the state in the next few years. When you have a new course, one thing that people sometimes don't realize is that, yeah, the course is on the books, but there may be no curriculum or very little curriculum. So how is that actually getting into schools? We had a course called Digital Forensics, which has been around for a few years. And it was written at basically a college level of difficulty, the standards, and then no one made curriculum for it. So after a few years, we have 6 teachers in the entire state of Texas teaching digital forensics, and some of them may be teaching not quite what the standards say, which is somewhat common in tech education. It's super, super important, and we were really mindful as these courses are being rolled out to try and reach out to partners and say, hey, you gonna make curriculum for this? How are we gonna actually get this into schools? And I think we've done an okay job of actually getting this in the pipeline to be actually implemented in schools. Right now it's under, so the actual pathway I have up here, and I can share some of these slides. The pathway basically says you need to take those 2 courses, the Foundations and the Capstone, and then they can select from 2 additional of the following. So you have the computer science courses, you have digital forensics, which we ended up rewriting the standards for because it was something that only 6-ish teachers taught. So we decided to make it more relevant to the pathway, and TEA let us do that. They waved the magic wand and said, you can do that. But we also have things like computer maintenance, internetworking technologies, and networking. There's kind of this give and take. But what ends up happening is that it's not always this cut and dry like, oh, we're going to do a cybersecurity pathway, boom, it gets done. Or boom, this was the intent of the bill, this is how it's going to get done. There's a lot of negotiation on the backside of some of this legislation. So with that said, let's look into 10 bills that passed this past legislative session, which are right now kind of in the works of actually getting implemented. I've categorized them. Actually, TCEA, Texas Computer Education Association, has categorized them into these categories, and we'll be going through them. So with coding and computer science, this is my main specialty and what I know probably the deepest with. And just really quick, in Texas, we have different types of courses. And these courses are in buckets. So, an English course, you have English in high school is English 1, English 2, English 3, maybe some creative writing course. They're in this bucket of courses called English or something like that. I wasn't an English teacher. I don't know. But with technology, we have 2 buckets actually that are separate in Texas. We have technology applications, which has kindergarten technology applications, which is, what you would think of as a normal kindergarten technology course, all the way up to like web development, and all the way up to video game programming, and all the way up to computer science 3 was under this. And we have a technology applications bucket, but then that's separate from the CTE bucket, which has a lot of different other courses that are generally more focused on career preparedness. But the CTE bucket gets increased funding from the state. So this is House Bill 3, which is if you were in Texas during the legislative session and had your hand or your finger on the pulse of education at all, you've probably heard about House Bill 3. It gave teachers raises. It did all this great stuff. But for us, what it did with computer science education is it did this huge thing. We got in that bill this rule change, that it was going to give weighted funding. So 1.35 means you're getting 35% more funding for every student in that class. And that's what CTE enjoyed all the time in, I believe it was grades 9 through 12. Some may have been able to get it in 8 through 12. Right now, with House Bill 3, this is weighted funding for 7 through 12, so it went down into the middle school, not all the way to 6 for some reason, 7 through 12, and it's for CTE and tech apps courses. So computer science courses now have weighted funding, and this is huge because districts make decisions based on this weighted funding. It's way more money when you start multiplying this out in the pockets of these districts when they have that weighted funding. And that's really, really huge because for me as an advocate, I could go to every single district and tell them, hey, I really want you to do computer science. It's important for kids. It's so, it's the literacy of the future. You should do it. That would take a lot of time for me to go to every district, and many districts probably won't do that. Having changes like this are sweeping. They instantaneously start to incentivize districts to do something, and it is huge. It also provided language for a blended learning grant, and that's neat too, and very EdTech related. I'm going to speed up here since I'm sure I'm a little slower than I wanted to be, but that's okay. With HB 963, two categories of courses merge. So not only did we get this bill in, which was the increased weighted funding, but these two chapters, the tech or buckets, the tech apps courses and the CTE courses, now we have legislation saying, hey, you're going to merge them, TEA, and you're going to eliminate the duplicate courses. So this is huge too. These two categories of courses are merging together, and things like CTE has a computer programming one. Well, we have computer science one over at Tech Apps. One of those courses is going to fall by the wayside, and that's a complicated process, which is, I think, being negotiated now, and they're trying to figure out exactly how that's going to play out. Ooh, excuse me. For this one, we did get a bill that did two things. And this was HB 2984. And it created a strategic plan for K-12 education. This is something, oh, excuse me, sorry. Choking on my own water. All right. This strategic plan is something that different states across the country are doing, and it's recommended throughout the advocacy circles as something that states should do. They're going to, Texas is supposed to be creating a strategic plan. They're also said that they would revise the K-8 tech apps. So that's big news for middle school and elementary school tech teachers. And that's going to change completely because they really had no coding in them before, and they're supposed to be putting coding in. That revision was supposed to happen sooner rather than later, and it's going to happen later. Part of this negotiation at the end of the bill cycle is, hey, TEA is saying we don't have money, we have this schedule, and it's just getting pushed off to, a long time from now. I think it was like 24 that it would be implemented. So not something that I'm super happy about being a K-5 teacher, but that's how it works. With broadband, which is the next category, there is a bill that was passed that would create a governor's broadband council. And this is a decade-long council that would basically just be reporting to the governor on broadband issues. That's important. Texas has a lot of rural locations, and broadband to us in Austin is probably like, dude, Google Fiber moved in years ago. Like not a big deal. And for education in rural locations, that does have implications, and it's important to have legislation like this that actually puts in place something that is reporting up to the governor. Digital learning, there were two bills that were trying to create a digital learning task force, which is very ed-techy and awesome. Those didn't happen, and the lieutenant governor ended up, I think they're going to do a study on it. So I'm not exactly sure what that means, but those did not pass. There was an assessment bill that did pass, and that has some implications if you're interested in computers and education. One thing was that all tests, the standardized tests, were mandated to actually move to electronic format. That was a mess when I had to do, I was a tech coordinator and I was trying to manage some of the tests, and I forget who it was. We went through a few different companies of Texas actually offering these, providing these tests. And there was one year, we have the kids who were in the special education program in the computer lab, and they're writing these essays, and their text disappeared. And it is the hardest thing to try and go tell a kid that they've worked on this and they have trouble working on tests, that their text disappeared and they need to write their essay over again. And there's no script that tells you how to do that. And you're supposed to be on script when you're doing STAR. It was very complicated, but they're transitioning to electronic assessments by 22-23. They also want to develop these interim assessments that I think are going to be just interesting, but also optional. For funding is a big one. We're going to, I think, skip through a little bit of this, but I'll give you the slides and you can look it up yourself. There's this thing called TIMA, or Technology and Instructional Materials Allotment. It's basically they had this tech fund and they had a textbook fund, and then they merged them together years ago, and everybody forgot about technology, but now they've tried to like re-jazz it up. I'm going to just breeze through this, but basically the instructional materials allotment is how schools are buying big purchases. So they're buying all of their math textbooks. And it's millions and millions of dollars that the state gives schools, and it happens every 2 years. So they have that money for 2 years. It's the biennium. You can actually look at tinyurl.com/TIMA2020 if you want. There's a spreadsheet on that shows, I believe it's this year and next year, what that amount is. And it's millions and millions of dollars for many districts. Those districts are they're in a tough position sometimes because they're buying both technology and physical resources with it. But an important thing for all those entrepreneurs out there is that you can actually get these, you can have school districts buy your materials with instructional materials allotment funds. You don't need to specifically be on the adopted materials list. There are rules and regulations around this, and school districts have processes to actually use these funds, but it's a huge untapped, or something that a lot of entrepreneurs don't actually know about, kind of revenue stream for if you can tap into some of these funds. They can also pay for things like salary of employees who provide support for the materials of the technology, things like that. House Bill 1 was the budget bill. That's why it had the number 1. It was the first thing that they proposed. And some of this, it was very budgety. It was hard to read through. But $12 million for blended learning, $2 million for UTeach, which is a University of Texas program, to focus on blending learning. So blended learning got really big. This other thing, they put in $29 million for initiatives that will systematically transform educator quality, blah, blah, blah. It was very vague. So how this all gets played out is very political. So at the end of these bill cycles or these legislative cycles, there may have been certain companies or certain organizations that have advocated for some of those things and maybe kind of shooed into these funding streams, but there may be a lot of wiggle room and unclarity in how actually they are going to be spent. So something that's just interesting to note. TIMA did get the House Bill 396 expanded the usage of TIMA. You can use it to pay for freight of instructional materials. I guess that wasn't allowed before. So they just kind of did some tweaks that I think districts were asking for. You could purchase software that helps manage instructional resources. So things like if you have a ton of Chromebooks, you can purchase, I think, your software to manage the Chromebooks. They're helping to deliver different materials. Cybersecurity, it's a dangerous digital world out there. And the legislature, this last legislative session, kind of put down the gauntlet on some school districts. So school districts now need to have a cybersecurity policy, and that policy involves actually designating in a district a cybersecurity coordinator, and that person must report on cybersecurity or cyber attacks, and they actually must notify parent or guardian if a student has their confidential information breached. I thought that was really neat. They also put in another bill, and that got passed, that is about training. So certain local government employees that are actually that this is inclusive of school districts, they need to be trained in cybersecurity training. Have you ever done cybersecurity training? It's a lot of like, don't click on this weird email. Like it's like they're trying to harden the human aspect of kind of social engineering and phishing. But this is coming down the pipeline. And then for professional development, they are doing micro-credentialing. So I haven't read through this bill very detailed. It seemed a little broad to me, but basically they want the State Board of Educator certification to officially kind of bless micro-credentials in educator certification. And I think that could be really neat. It's going to be interesting on how that's actually going to play out. How am I doing on time here? 15 more minutes? Cool. Okay, cool. That's good. I should have really taken note of when, I started, but that's okay. I'm going to do a few predictions now that we kind of went through some of the more drier stuff. This is my crystal ball. Here's what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 2 years in Texas EdTech. So for me, I think computer science, and this may just be because this is what I advocate for, I think it's going to continue its upward trend. Right now we have 43% of schools in 17-18, that's the last year we have data for, are offering computer science, and those numbers are going up. I think they're going to continue to go up, and I think you may actually see that slope increase because of the funding. With tech apps being in a different bucket or in the CTE bucket and getting the weighted funding, you may see this curve start to slope much higher upward. So that's good news for, I think, all kids, because I feel like computer science is kind of a fundamental literacy of our time, and that's what I like. So I think it's going to continue its upward trend. One thing to note is that we've actually had right here, this breaks at computer science students out. So this is all computer science students, and this is underrepresented minorities, economically disadvantaged, and female. We've actually had less female students by percentage in computer science courses. And we're seeing the underrepresented minority students and economically disadvantaged students kind of trend up with the line, the general trend line of all students, but female participation isn't necessarily trending up as quickly. So that's something that as a system we need to continue to work on and address. Cybersecurity, I think, is going to be big. I think that, so a few days ago, I think Manor just announced that they lost over $1 million in a cybersecurity phishing scam. I think that there's going to be two things. One, you're going to see more direct instruction of cybersecurity education, and cybersecurity education is going to be bigger in that you're going to see schools, I believe, actually try and take some of the maybe CompTIA, Security Plus, some of these certifications that are industry certifications, and put their kids on some type of accelerated pathway to actually get those certifications by the time they graduate or shortly after. I think there are some schools in the state that are kind of primed to do that. I think with cybersecurity in general, digital citizenship is kind of a big thing in the younger grades, and that's going to be rolled further into cybersecurity. I think as you're learning not to cyberbully each other, you may learn, like, you may not want to pick up a thumb drive and plug it into your computer if you found it on the street and it says really awesome things included here. Like just some of those type of things. For cybersecurity with schools, as I said, I think that, you know, the attacks are going to get worse. I think schools are going to have to actually put in employee positions that harden their school districts. And I mean, there's a lot of sensitive information held by schools. There's a lot of important information held by schools, like grades. And I really think that it's going to become a bigger and bigger issue for schools, but it's also a really neat thing that you can see that kids are learning more about cybersecurity. So that's two sides of the cybersecurity coin. With purchasing, I think schools are going to get, and some school districts are very, very cautious about what they purchase. School districts who are in the know are creating very harsh guidelines over, oh, you want to sell us your app, or, oh, you want to sell us your EdTech product. Here's what your privacy standards need to be. Here's how you use student data. Here's what we expect from you. Those things are going to be more and more, I think, even at small districts, requirements. I think also purchasing, we're going to see kind of these ground shifts. I had bought a Chromebook a few years ago, and I just got a message on it saying, Google's going to stop auto updating it because you're at the end of the life of this Chromebook. I had to Google, I'm like a pretty tech savvy guy. I had to Google search why my Google Chromebook was going to like basically obsolete itself. And Chromebooks from the time they're made have a lifespan of 5 years. That's not going to work for every school district. And I think that there are school districts that purchase a lot of Chromebooks that in 5 years or 4 years, or depending on how they bought that and when, it's not 5 years from when you bought it, it's 5 years from when they first manufactured it. So if they're getting bricks and security issues with Chromebooks and things like that, they're going to possibly shift away from something like that into back to Windows machines, back to, maybe into iPads. It's really, really confusing kind of way on how districts are choosing to buy their technology. I think it's a really convoluted path when they're making these big technology devices or buys. And that for developers is a nightmare because you just need to make sure that your thing that you're selling works on everything. And I think that for teachers, that's hard too, because you could go from one district to another and you're just in a completely different ed tech environment. And sometimes some teachers would approach that as being fun and exciting. But a lot of teachers may approach that as just another thing added on. Purchasing, as we saw, there's a lot of money coming down. So some of those, the weighted funding, how CTE works is a portion of that weighted funding is supposed to be put into the courses that are getting that weighted funding, so training the teachers. I think purchasing for computer science professional development is going to increase. I think purchasing for any type of professional development related to technology is probably going to increase. Micro-credentialing, I think, is going to be big. I don't know how this is going to shake out. I know there's a lot of, like, LinkedIn, I could have my micro-credentials on it. And there's different initiatives, but even from, at UT, I have read grants and done a few things that expose me to, the nation and what different states are thinking. Micro-credentialing is hot for some reason, and I think it's going to continue to get hotter. I personally don't really get it that much, but I think it's neat. I said I don't get it that much, but when like Common Sense Media had like, oh, I could get a badge and I'm a certified Common Sense Media digital citizenship teacher. I think I did that. I also did like Google certified teacher or something at some point. So like it's going to be an interesting mix of companies trying to for-profit credentialing and then the state trying to figure out like, oh, maybe you could get this micro credential and teach cybersecurity. So how that ends up shaking out will be interesting, but I think it's going to be here. And I think the last thing is that, you know, I saw through cybersecurity the course, you know, legislation and then kind of how that played out is that these bills get passed and then there's like not 2 different ways, but a billion different ways that they can end up getting shaked out in the end, shook out. Cybersecurity, the bill just was written kind of in a vague manner, and they tried to go back to the author after the fact and be like, so what did you really mean? And then it's like, well, that's not what it says. So at the end of the day, people in charge, like TEA or who's doing the implementing, things can go any which direction they choose. So trying to read the tea leaves and call the future exactly from how these bills are passing, even if the bill says something like the tech apps TEKS being rewritten from K through 8, that bill said like rewrite the tech apps, and that's just not happening right now. So I think after the session is over and the legislators go home, you know, the implementation of these can really go in a lot of different directions. And some may be beneficial to the cause of, you know, expanding computer science education or expanding education technology in schools, and some may be kind of hindering to that cause. Really quick, if you want to be more engaged, TCEA has a conference. I put the wrong logo here. It's not We Teach CS. TCEA has a conference. It's the Texas Computer Education Association. It's at the Convention Center, and that's coming up at the very beginning of February. As a teacher, when I went to TCEA for the first time, I was absolutely amazed. It was just a conference full of other teachers sharing things that they do in the classrooms related specifically to EdTech, which was really, really neat. We Teach CS Summit, which is this slide, that is completely about computer science education, and that's a great event. It's not very policy focused, so if this put you to sleep, you could still go to that and have, you know, a great time. It's really focused on educators. So that's at tinyurl.com/WeTeachCS2020. Registration's open now for that. You'll maybe see me there if you want to come to a session on elementary coding. I have a great session that I do kindergarten through 2nd grade, and we talk about how teachers can actually teach coding in those grades. CS for Texas, we're doing webinars now about 2 times per year. We're doing advocacy updates and kind of highlighting wins across the state. I can try and figure out how to get that information to you. You can also join our meetup page, and we're slowly shutting it down, but if you join now, you'll probably get some email saying join this email list. Special thanks. I don't know all of this myself. I knew much of it, but not all of it. And TCEA Advocacy Coalition really helped me out. Jennifer Berglund from TCEA is amazing. She was, you know, during session, she was there. She was at the Capitol really pushing for education technology. And they do immense work, and she helped share some resources with me that I could actually put this talk together tonight. So thank you to them. I don't know, again, very bad with timing. Oh, so we have plenty of time. Cool. All right. We'll do any questions right now, and if not, we'll break and drink some beer and eat some sandwiches. Does anyone have any questions on any of these bills or any of the just general advocacy legislation in general? Yes.
Thanks, Ryan, for all this information. Now, the TA is going to say thou shalt offer cybersecurity, but what does that mean for, say, AIS does that mean that they're going to offer it in some campuses, all campuses? Is there some enforcement, or more to the point, how do they get this big bucket of money that is now available?
Yes. So with cybersecurity is a course pathway that's under this thing. So high schools have endorsements now, and it's under the STEM endorsement. And with the cybersecurity legislation that passed, it actually doesn't force schools' hands into forcing them to offer it. It's a pathway that they can choose to offer, and hopefully they're incentivized by some of the increased funding. One thing that TEA has had on the books, so in the Texas Administrative Code, on the books for years now, has been that every high school must offer Computer Science 1 and either Computer Science 2 or AP Computer Science. And if you can look back at my graph here, 43% of high schools offer at least one CS course. So we have 60-ish%, I would say, not in compliance with that rule. And that for CS for Texas, for a couple of years now, we've been trying to kind of poke around the Capitol and see is anybody going to, enforce this? And the answer is no. No one is going to enforce that. The rule is on the books that every high school needs to offer Computer Science 1, but it's not getting done. Some districts don't know that they're supposed to offer it, but there's no enforcement mechanism. And TEA has, I guess in the past, historically, at one point, been more of an enforcement agency, and then really stepped away from that and looks at themselves as not an enforcement agency and much more of a partner to school districts. So that's not getting enforced. So anything that comes from, it gets written into the rules that says you must do it, and it's related to not reading, math, that type of, English, STAR testing, I think is questionable on whether exactly it's going to get done in the way it's written.
There's a brand new allotment of money somewhere.
So,
Where's this money go towards cybersecurity? How do people get that money?
So with the increased funding, the weighted funding, to get the weighted funding, so with those bills, there were financial riders to those bills, and the state had to set aside, because you can't increase the funding formula and then not set aside the money. And they set aside a large amount of money, I can't remember the exact number, to basically pay out schools on, they need to have students in those seats, in those classrooms, and then there is some system that schools have dealt with for years and years because they've been doing CTE courses on, I think they start with one payment and then settle up at the end of the year somehow with depending on how students move throughout. Yeah, it's enrollment. Yeah.
You get in the seat for in a computer science class, you get more money for it. You know what
Yeah.
if the funding is especially you get 1.35%, it has to go to this you have to spend it on this, or
So there's rules on how it's spent, and a portion of that money, and I can't remember off the top of my head what percentage of that money, must be spent. And I'm not sure if it's on the specific course that it came from or just the courses that are garnering that weighted funding in general at the school. You can come out if you want. No problem. It's this direction. Yep. Yes.
Are there unique teacher certifications for the cybersecurity classes and some of the others? Or is it just the standard computer science and then anyone can actually teach that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when you're talking about certifications with technology education, there's, in my world, there's two, but there's more nuance to it. The main thing that people have is either early childhood through 12th grade tech app certification. So that allows you to teach, kindergarten technology applications, web design, and it even allows you to teach fundamentals of computer science. They changed that rule. For the first intro to cybersecurity course, which is called Foundations of Cybersecurity, that certification, the general tech app certification, allows the teacher to teach that. With the second one, I believe they need the 8 through 12 computer science certification. The tech apps one is generally thought of as much easier to get. The 8 through 12 computer science one is you need to know some object-oriented programming. I passed it by the skin of my teeth. And it's something that teachers actually really study for. Yeah. Yeah, so We Teach CS, one of the offerings of We Teach CS is they have two things related to the 8 through 12 certification. One is they have three things. One is an in-person course. That's a 2-day boot camp for teachers. Another is an online course. That's a 6-week duration course that both of those things prepare you to take that certification exam. So any teacher in Texas, just in case you're not familiar, if you have a teaching certification in Texas, you can test into any other subject area. So if I am the geography teacher and I'm certified in geography, I could take the computer science test and then be certified in geography and computer science. Those two offerings by We Teach CS basically prep existing teachers to take that computer science course. The other thing that they do is they have an incentive program, so it's a certification incentive program. If you're currently a certified teacher, you fill out some paperwork and they will give you $1,000 at the end of your certification journey if you successfully achieve 8 through 12 CS certification. And that's just a check that they cut you in the mail. I got it when I was an elementary school teacher. Yes. Yep. So the TEKS on those courses, I can go back to it. It's they're going to be under. Well, they should be under. I think they're under the high school TEKS, which you can find at tinyurl.com/highschoolTEKS, and that's just the technology applications TEKS. As they merge, the TEKS are going to stay the same, but this web link may not work anymore. But yeah, so one thing is, I think in general with educator certification, certification is like this minimum bar. And then a lot of times the teacher needs to get additional training to teach the courses that they need to teach. So this is, I think, okay for the minimum bar, but I do worry sometimes about the cybersecurity and especially the depth of the second course. Yeah.
Get a certification, you don't really know how to lay out the course and teach it.
Yeah.
The equivalent of a digital textbook for teachers would be.
Yeah. And so there's a organization called NICERC. It's I'm not going to remember that. It's NICERC, and it's cybersecurity education research. I think it's funded by Department of Defense, and they have curriculum. They're starting to really like push out a lot of things that are aligned to cybersecurity education, to the point where they have, I think maybe one of the more robust offerings right now. Yes. Question in the back? Oh, yep. Oh, I was calling on somebody else, but if you would like to cede to her. Oh, well, I was going to go for him. Sorry.
Like TA doesn't do enforcement, but TA does prioritize, say, STAR assessments to such an extent that the school day of a typical kid is split into math and reading instruction. And so in like the math curriculum, there's like some like economics and like there's some kind of sneaky other things they want you to teach, but they make teach for them because they know that social studies doesn't get taught. Is there a ploy, I don't see how computer science is going to be embraced until it is
Right now, I don't think there is. I would say not for this coming legislative session. That's not going to be a push. Nationally, I think there's little appetite to add on testing for things that aren't the core, because in general, I think the feeling is that kids are over tested to begin with, right? Or at current. So when you start adding in computer science, do you start adding in, the art history class or some different things like that? I think there is this movement for computer science for all, which, has some problems, but so a city like Chicago, they decided we're going to do computer science for all and we're going to really do it. We're going to have every, high school have it mandatory to teach computer science and actually enforce it, and had a multi-year plan to get there. I think people want to pull those levers much more than we're going to make this computer science test. As far as integrating things into other subjects, there's been a lot of talk about integrating this idea of computational thinking. We're not going to do computer science. We're going to do computational thinking, which is the ideas that underlie computer science, into subjects like math, or maybe even reading. And that conversation often happens and is implicated in early grades. So kindergarten through maybe 8th grade even is when you see a lot of people push for integration. For me, I personally think that we need direct instruction of technology and direct instruction of computer science, and that integrating it isn't a great option. But I see why people are drawn to that. Yep. And then...
So the blended learning part that you were talking about, is that for both the students who are going to take the course as well as for the teachers who have to take it, just like cybersecurity? And how is that
So with blended learning, it's blended learning was completely removed from cybersecurity. There were different things that were addressing blended learning than were in the cybersecurity bills. With blended learning, there was money for, it was UTeach and other providers to actually support teachers and do basically professional development of teachers to support blended learning. But then there was, I think, also money to do blended learning grants. There was blended learning in a couple areas in some of the bills. Some of these bills end up doing similar things, and how they actually end up interacting can be funky sometimes. With the blended learning stuff, I'm not as knowledgeable about it, but my guess is that school districts would probably be able to apply for these grant programs and bring down money from the state to support their expansion of blended learning programs. Yep. Yeah.
So they're still going to start figuring out the curriculum, right? They're getting the curriculum.
So
Find somebody who can work on this curriculum, because there is TEAC's design,
yep.
right? Like the code units, but somebody has to create, right?
So yeah, so it's an interesting thing. So you don't run into this with when they rewrite the math TEACs, there's curriculum providers there to provide that curriculum. When you write a new cybersecurity course or something that's a little off of the beaten path, I don't want to speak for TEA, but I think that TEA's stance is that they will review curriculum, they put out a call for curriculum, but they don't necessarily really actively recruit and make sure that there's curriculum in there. So they put out a call for curriculum, and then I think they have some type of review process, because things can end up on this approved curriculum list. With digital forensics, what happened is no one created the curriculum. Textbook companies, it just wasn't big enough of a course, and it was too complicated, or maybe it wasn't too complicated, but wasn't big enough of a course to have a market to actually sell to. So no one ended up making curriculum. And then at that point, it's like, well, the teachers can create the curriculum. And sometimes that may work because 6 teachers were teaching it. But then that may also not work because only 6 teachers in Texas were teaching it. I'm saying 6, but it may have been more like 12, but it's still a very small number. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So for the rewriting of the tech app standards, is that something that has to, and cybersecurity for that matter as well, is that something that has to go through state board approval? So there's a point where STA kind of puts together a standard setting committee, and maybe they have public input at that point, maybe not, but at some point, it seems like it would go to the state board for consideration and approval, and,
Yep.
and then people can come and maybe let's show up and be like, we want that, or what about this kind of thing. Do you know what that process is like, and are there opportunities for that public input?
Yep. So there's always opportunities that I know of. There's always opportunities for public comment. They'll open a window for public comment. Rewriting the tech apps TEKS will be different than actually creating the cybersecurity TEKS because cybersecurity was new courses. And then the tech apps rewrite, they're looking at, I don't know how many off the top of my head, 20 tech apps courses and trying to go through. I think that's a more involved process, and they have a calendar that they actually, they are rewriting things based on this calendar of rewriting. So at one point, like health was coming up and they were worried, about sex ed and all of these kind of, Texas-y issues that they were worried were going to be lightning bolts. And, there was talk about maybe they would push that off, but I don't think they did. I think they rewrote the health, or were rewriting the health TEKS. With history, that was a big one that got controversial, but that's all done based on a calendar. When Tech Apps moves to CTE, I believe the CTE calendar is a separate calendar and is more aggressive in the frequency of rewrites because CTE is viewed as this is technology, even though Tech Apps is technology, but CTE is viewed as this could change more quickly and it's career aligned, so we need to keep it on the cutting edge. For comment periods open up, but it's only as good as how many people know about the comment period. So we tried to blast out the comment period to our network because we knew, that people may have interest in cybersecurity, but especially with tech apps or computer science or something that's very industry related, it's hard because you want educators to comment, but then you also actually need people in the field to comment. Like with cybersecurity, it was like, we need to find cybersecurity people to actually look at this. But then it's hard because sometimes those things don't align, but the comment periods are only as good as how many people you can get them out to. But there are comment periods. I believe for the rewrites, there'll be comment periods too. But I'm not 100% sure. The rewrites will definitely, by the way, just because the legislators did put that bill in, it will have coding, computational thinking. So that's good, I think. And there are national standards that many states are basing their standards off of. And Texas likes to say we're doing our own thing, but a lot of times we'll base our standards off of, what the national standards are. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
So for the strategic plan for the K-12 statewide plan, I think I read somewhere that they're creating an advocacy or a advisory board. Is that correct? Do you know what the status of that is at the moment?
Yep. So I think that I'm trying to get to that one. Yep. So the inside scoop on that, I think, is that there was a little confusion of who was literally creating this advisory board. So they're trying to create a committee that will then create a strategic plan. And they're in the bill, I believe, or negotiated behind the scenes, there are there are actual set things, like the lieutenant governor gets to pick one person. This person gets to pick one person. These people can nominate this many people. So there's like a process that has underlied the idea of creating this committee to create the strategic plan. From what I've heard behind the scenes is that it hasn't necessarily like launched yet. So there's still, no one's picked their person, and they're still slowly kind of figuring out who is actually convening this committee. In the past, with the cybersecurity, actually, you know, the office that I work for at UT, we convened the computer science task force to talk about cybersecurity, to then give to the government, TEA, a report based on what we talked about. And that was a way of kind of not forcing their hand, but just jump-starting the process of, we've just convened all these experts together, and here you go. Like, we have a report, please do something with it. I don't think that type of action is probably going to happen for this, but I think it's going to be months until a committee actually gets in place. All right, cool. You want to close it out? Great, thank you so much for
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was more things than I could even fit in my head at once. That was amazing. Super informative. Last thing I just want to say is, if you were at all interested in participating, either as a startup and hosting groups of kids and telling them about what you do, join us at the Student Startup Crawl. Or if you are a teacher and would be interested to bring these kids on this free field trip where they get exposed to technology and, you know, downtown Austin and all the amazing things that they can do if they get involved in computer science education or technology education, please join us. I'll leave this up. Please, oh yeah.
What are the ages?
I believe it is middle and high school. And there is, I think there's a whole website on it. Lena set this up, so give it a scan. I'll leave this up here. Last thing I want to say, please help us finish off all of the food and the drinks. That way I have less to carry home. So thank you guys, and thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Yeah.